quite a small quarter for dividends, for the normal dividends. And what I mean by that is actually we get lots of dividends coming through Q2, Q3 from particularly Europe and Asia. I think what's unusual in this period is to have the size of special dividends. So actually, the headline probably is that despite another very, very tough year for companies, the war, inflation, interest rates, they're doing an amazing job generating cash and recovering from COVID.
Ben, can we talk about who is paying out and who wasn't? Because in the past, we've seen these supersized profits from mining companies, a lot of special dividends declared from that sector, but it seemed as though that was a drag. How do we think about the ones that are paying out now versus those that are just not?
Well, I think what we've seen is that the mining company has changed over the last 6 to 7 years. They've moved to having dividend payouts that are more variable based on the commodity prices. So they've accepted that commodity prices do vary significantly, and they'll give dividends to investors, but they don't want to be, held to account for a very large dividend that might not be covered, because they found that didn't really help the share price in the past. So I think what we've seen is that the commodity cycle, recovered very strongly. It's been a bit weaker over the last year, and these companies have just moderated those dividends. But many of them have cash balance sheets, so they're definitely not cutting them from a position of weakness. Practical about their distributions.
Just on the balance, Ben, good morning to you. And we've talked about this many times as well. Is the balance coming back into divvy from buyback? Because buyback, again, a lot of the shareholders, they don't particularly like them. And to be fair, I don't think buybacks are particularly efficient given the random nature of the underlying market and how very often the buyback ends up on the wrong side of the trade. But is the divvy coming back, because it requires more confidence? And I say that because it's juxtaposed against the world that potentially is slowing down and going into recession.
Yeah, so maybe just for you, this time we have got buybacks in the report. So we've got a special report in this one that says, well, what's happening to buybacks? And actually, buybacks are even higher, and the growth is even higher in buybacks than it is in dividends over the last year. So the buybacks are also a record figure. So we're not seeing dividends increase at the expense of buybacks, and we're not seeing buybacks increase at the expense of dividends on a headline level. We're just seeing companies, large companies, maybe like your previous guest was talking about, large, well-capitalized companies, just being very successful at generating cash for their investors, and they're giving some back.
Yeah, I can't believe it. Janus Henderson have done that just for me to put the buybacks in. Thank you so much indeed for that, Ben. I appreciate it. Or you might have just mentioned it just for me. One of the two. I think it's the former. But my other point about this is in terms of the sectors which, I've got two different sectors I want to ask you about in one question. One, telecom, which is just a woeful performing sector. You'll know the kind of names I'm talking about. Have these massive, great big 7 to 9% divvies as well. How sustainable are those? And my second question within that is technology. Are the technology owners now realising that actually the shareholders want a little bit more bang for their buck in terms of income rather than just relying on share price gains?
I think if I take the second question first, yes and no. So we've got a clear divide between those companies that are generating a lot of cash and who are distributing that in the form of dividends and buybacks. And I'd put that camp would be Apple, one of the biggest one of the top 10 payers in this quarter is Apple. Apple, Microsoft, many of the semiconductor companies are paying dividends. But then there's another group, Meta, Netflix, and the likes of Alphabet, and they just have never come to the dividend list. They are a large percentage of the buybacks that we see. So that it's not that they are adverse to returning cash to investors, but that group have not changed their behavior. So in tech, we've still got people returning dividends, and we've still got the same people not